There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up a simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We have found much heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence, of which we had not even dreamed. You know, the next paragraph here, he's talking about this, the way that the Creator has entered our hearts, and to me, that's what he's talking about when he's talking about that fourth dimension of existence, is that everywhere I go and everything I do, I actually feel the presence of God there with me. I mean, sometimes you might have to step away from the situation for a minute and remind yourself, but it's 90% of the time it's right there. I mean, I don't even have to try to make a contact with it. The great fact is just this and nothing less. That's a pretty profound statement right there. The great fact is just this and nothing less, that we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences. And they got that little asterisk there at the bottom of the page, and I don't think we're going to read that. It's kind of silly. My personal opinion, I don't go back and read it very often. Which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and towards God's universe. Now, stopping to think about that for a minute, how has it revolutionized my whole attitude toward life, toward my fellows, and towards God's universe? From my own experience, and it comes from this book, was that I was living my life based on self, and that today I've almost gone completely in the other direction, in which I feel in my heart that my only reason for living today is to serve God and to serve others. That is my primary reason in life, and that everything else in my life comes after that. And I really don't have to stop and convince myself of it anymore, because I've been through the experience of living, thinking of others, and then I've lived all those years thinking of myself, and I can tell you that I have definitely kind of whole attitude, revolutionized my whole attitude toward life, toward my fellows, and toward God's universe. The central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. He has commenced to accomplish those things for us which we could never do by ourselves. If you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, you know, I bring this paragraph up a lot when I'm... In AA meetings, not everybody is as seriously alcoholic as I am. That there are people in these AA meetings who can stop on a non-spiritual basis. They come in here, but the requirement doesn't say that you have to be able... your only way of stopping is a non-spiritual basis or a spiritual basis. It says the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. So anybody who wants to and has a desire to stop drinking is welcome in here. But there are the few of us, in my opinion, I don't know. My personal experience is, how many people do you see sponsoring literally dozens or hundreds of people around here? How many people do you see going after sponsoring others like their life depends upon it? Do you understand the difference that I'm talking about? There are people who come in here, who come in and hang out. They answer the phone in the middle of the meeting. They leave early. They hit on the women. They're doing things that you're looking at them going, look, that guy's half-assing his recovery. Why can't I half-ass my recovery? Why do I have to work so hard to stay sober? Because there's a difference between those people. There are some people who come in here that can stop. When you go into the types of alcoholics, out into the chapter of the wives, and when you back up into the doctor's opinion, they give the doctor's opinion gives 5 types of alcoholics, and the chapter of the wives gives 4 types, and then it explains how to approach those different 4 types. But the idea we're trying to get to here is that not everybody is as seriously alcoholic as we were, as the way he's put it right here. Literally, it's going to be the most important thing in my life that I go after other people in sponsorship. And to implement these lives, the 3 spiritual solutions, into my life every day. So if you are as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there is no middle-of-the-road solution. That's coming in late, leaving early, answering your phone. If you're a real alcoholic, it's not going to work for you. And you're going to sit there and wonder why that this other guy can do it and you can't. That there's something different about you. This AA stuff just doesn't work for you. You gotta. But all the while, they never actually give the AA thing a shot. They're saying, well, he comes in late and he leaves early and he's hanging out and doing nothing. He's sponsoring nobody. I've seen him in here for years. He sponsors no one and he stays sober. Why can't I do that? We were in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we had passed into the region from which there is no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. And I have to tell you, the two alternatives for me wasn't a matter of reading it in a book. It was a matter of it came from a bottle. One day it hit me. I was going to die, or I got to do this AA thing, and there is no middle-of-the-road solution. There's only two answers to this question. There's not a third. I tried the third one to go back to the good old. That was my third option. One option, as he says here, was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. The other, to accept spiritual help. I had a third solution. That third solution was to go back to drinking when it was fun. And I tried that for many years before I came in here. This we did because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. I have to tell you the truth. I didn't want to. I felt like I was threatened. My only option was die or get sober, and I felt forced to do it. And it was later on that I voluntarily do this on my own. Today I say to myself, I offer myself to God voluntarily because this is what I want to do with my life. But before I said I offer myself to God because I don't want to die, and you haven't given me a third solution. There's no other way out. I don't want to do this, but I have to. But today I actually, like he says here, because we honestly wanted to and were willing to make the effort. Today I think that's the right thing for my self-will, is to see it for what it is and offer it back to God. Now this next paragraph is about this guy, Roland Hazard. You guys have heard of Roland Hazard? I don't know if you have. Roland Hazard is the guy who got Ebby Thatcher. Okay, Ebby Thatcher was back in Bill's story. Ebby Thatcher was a childhood friend of Bill Wilson's. He was in a sanitarium, and they were going to lock him up. And this guy, two guys from the Oxford groups, went before a judge to get Ebby Thatcher released to them so that they could try the 4 absolutes of the Oxford groups, which later became a rough cut of the six steps that they were working at that time. And this guy, he's talking about Roland Hazard here. A certain American businessman had ability, good sense, and high character. For years he had floundered from one sanitarium to another. He had consulted the best-known American psychiatrist. Then he had gone to Europe, which was Sweden, right? Placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Jung, which was Dr. Carl Jung. He's one of the he's kind of like the Sigmund Freud. He was one of the early founders of modern psychiatry, psychology. He's he's one of the big guys up there who prescribed for him. Though experience had made him skeptical, he finished his treatment with the usual confidence. His physical and mental condition were unusually good. Above all, he believed he had acquired such a profound knowledge of the inner workings of his mind and its hidden springs that relapse was unthinkable. Nevertheless, he was drunk in a short time. More baffling still, he could give himself no satisfactory explanation for this fall. They're going to later on, they're going to tell us that knowledge of your condition will not keep you sober. And when I first got sober, we used to sit in front of these. This was back in 1990 down at the House of Hope and a couple other places I filtered through 20 years ago. And they used to sit us in front of these TV screens when they'd have doctors in smocks come up and explain to us the chemical compositions and the molecular effects that it had on the brain, the human brain, and how your brain was what got you drunk and your brain was what got you high. It wasn't the drugs. They were poisoning you. The alcohol poisons you, your brain. And I thought that all that stuff was pure genius, and it didn't mean nothing. It meant absolutely nothing. When it comes down to it, we're going to get into another chapter. I believe it's in the chapter We Agnostics. Bill Wilson talks about how the bridge of reason does not lead to the land of faith. And that's one of the ideas that we're trying to get to here is, the idea that self-knowledge will not keep you sober. You must act on sobriety. What you do with your life must manifest in service for others and service to God. Otherwise, no amount of knowledge, no amount of anything that you learn is going to make a bit of difference if you don't actually live your life in service of God. And I feel in my heart that my life is only meant to be, sacrificed for others, which I always say if I had a list of reasons why I'm alive today, it would have to be the number one reason now. I mean, what would be the number two? Self would be number two, and I know where self got me. So he returned to this doctor, whom he had admired, and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. Why was this? He begged the doctor to tell him the whole truth, and he got it. And the doctor's judgment was utterly hopeless. He could never regain his position in society, and he would have to place himself under lock and key or hire a bodyguard if he expected to live long. That was the great physician's opinion. But this man still lives. He is a free man. He does not need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on this earth where other men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. And that is the attitude that we're going to be getting to here. The attitude of selflessness on the premise that selfishness and thinking of myself. And when we get out to the fourth step, that's one of the things that's really been burning into my head over the last few years, was that third column in the fourth step where it says that part of my life that it affects. I never gave that a second look for many years. I used to always look at that third column and go, I don't know, it's just one of them things they're having you write down. It affects my self-esteem, my security, my personal relations, my ambitions. You guys are, some of you know what I'm talking about, and others, if not, we'll get out there in a few, another week or two, whatever it is, probably a few months, the way I'm reading. But anyway, one of the things I was getting at was that I never made a conscious decision to be a selfish, self-centered person. I was simply running on my instincts, and my instinct for self-preservation is what runs my life even to this day, and I have to fight it tooth and nail, hand-to-hand combat with my self-will, with the fear that I'm not going to have what I want in life, that I'm going to lose the things that I have already gained. It's like a constant battle. It's literally is almost, in my opinion, like trench warfare, the World War I that Bill Wilson was about to experience when he saw that Winchester Cathedral, that first little hint of spirituality that he got. Some of our alcoholic readers may think they can do without spiritual help. Let us tell you the rest of the conversation our friend had with his doctor. The doctor said, "You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic. I have never seen one single case recover where that state of mind existed to the extent that it does in you." So you see, there's a difference between this person that he's talking about here. This is a life and death thing for this person, and there's no other way out of here but spiritual help. And my own experience with it was that I came into AA and I saw people who were getting the things in life and were not dedicating their life to sponsorship and helping others and learning these steps and implementing these spiritual solutions into their daily lives. And I wanted the easy way. I wanted the what do you say? There is no middle of the road. I wanted the middle of the road solution. Half measures availed us nothing. I wanted to half measure it. But half measures don't avail you half sobriety. Half measures. If you were a real alcoholic, if you were as seriously alcoholic as we are, there is no middle-of-the-road solution. Half measures avail us nothing. You have got to go after these steps and implement these spiritual solutions and help others through the 12 steps, or you're not going to make it. And you're going to scratch your head wondering, why does that guy who's sitting around doing nothing make it? Because they're not real alcoholics. They don't, a spiritual solution, maybe they're the alcoholic type number one who can stop if they really wanted to. If something bad enough happens, they can stop. But those bad things never stopped me. Matter of fact, they probably made me drink worse. He said to the doctor, "Is there no exception?" "Yes," replied the doctor, "there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements, ideas, emotions, and attitudes which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men which are, I am the center of the universe. I am the reason for everything. I was the reason that the dinosaurs were here in preparation for the day that I got here, that the whole world revolved around me, and now I have to completely invert that and say that God is the reason for everything, and that I am here to serve that whoever it is, that whatever it is that created this place. Are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I have been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangements within you. With many individuals, the methods which I employ are successful, but I have never been successful with an alcoholic of your description. Upon hearing this, our friend was somewhat relieved, for he reflected that after all, he was a good church member. This hope, whatever, was destroyed by the doctors telling him that while his religious convictions were very good, in his case, they did not spell the necessary vital spiritual experience. Here was the terrible dilemma in which our friend found himself when he had the extraordinary experience which, as we have already told you, made him a free man. Now, I'm pretty sure that I read in not Pass It On, but the other one, Comes of Age. I read in Comes of Age that even Bill didn't remember which one of them gave him, whether it was Dr. Silkworth or Ebby Thatcher, that gave him the book William James, Varieties of Religious Experience, which is where a lot of the foundation of our program of recovery came from, was that, and that little asterisk we were reading there, it's about to mention it here in a minute, that little asterisk that was on that other page that says, see Appendix 2, that really is, it's a reference to William James's idea that most religious experience, as they call it, spiritual experience, is what we come to call it today is spiritual experience, and spiritual awakening is in the steps. Spiritual awakening is only one place, and it's right there. It was in, and they changed that. The editorial board changed that. Most of the places it says spiritual experience, not awakening, and the term came from this William James book, where he goes into, that roughly 10% of them are sudden and profound, like Bill Wilson's was, and 90% are gradual and educated, and takes even decades to come about. But anyway, a lot of that idea came from that book that he's fixing to mention here, and it came from Ebby Thatcher, who got it from this guy, Roland Hazard, who bailed Ebby out of the predicament that he was in. I even heard somebody say last week when we were talking about it that one of those two guys was the son of the judge who Ebby was in front of. But anyway, to my experience, there's a lot in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's either those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it sort of thing. If you're a real alcoholic, then the history of AA is of importance to you, because it's your future or it's not your future. That's the way I look at it anyway. I've always wanted to know the details of how they came about, all that stuff. We, in turn, sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. What seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. A new life has been given us, or, if you prefer, a design for living that really works. That's one of my favorite things to use, too. We, in our turn, sought the same escape with all the desperation of drowning men. To grasp this Alcoholics Anonymous program and these steps and this book and these directions with all the desperation. How many people do you see come in here and do that? I mean, really. I don't think I did that either, but it's been a long time that I've been sticking my head in this book so I don't go back out, I have dedicated a lot of my life to this, so I don't end up one of the many who comes in here and says, oh, I lost my time. Oh, well. The distinguished American psychologist William James, in his book Varieties of Religious Experience, and if Bill Wilson says that while he was still working his steps and somewhat /detox in his last time in the hospital up there with Dr. Silkworth, that Ebby Thatcher he says, I can't remember, but I think Ebby Thatcher gave me that book. He came in and gave him this book, and that's where these ideas came to him, was number one, through the Oxford groups, because Ebby was one alcoholic helping another, and this varieties of religious experience, which Bill was reading while he had his, so to speak, indicates a multitude of ways in which men have discovered God. We have no desire to convince anyone that there is only one way by which faith can be acquired. If what we have learned and felt and seen means anything at all, it means that all of us, whatever our race, creed, or color, are the children of a loving Creator with whom we may form a relationship. So, how we form our relationship with this God is on the premise of self versus selflessness. And as we get into those latter, the latter pages out into how it works, we're going to see that self manifests in our lives in three primary forms: anger, fear, and guilt. And that we have three spiritual solutions that we're going to apply, which include action, something you're going to do in your daily life to combat these three most common forms of self. Remember, I never made a conscious decision to be a selfish, self-centered person. I was simply running on my instincts. My instinct for self-preservation said, you got to get what you got to get to survive. And I didn't know it was running my life. But today, there is a way that I can combat that. I can find these things. I find my anger, find my fear, and find my guilt, and I apply the spiritual solutions to them. I apply forgiveness with the help of God and the action of how can I be of help to them. I apply faith. The 12th step is the directions for faith, and by the way, faith in God is helping others find their way to God, and dedicating your life to helping others is how we achieve freedom from fear based in self. But anyway, when we get out to those pages, we'll go into those details. Children of a loving Creator with whom we may form a relationship upon simple and understandable terms. That's a very simple idea. That through living step 12 in my life, the fear that drives me to that first drink. Remember, when we get onto these later pages too, we're going to see that there is a driving force behind my obsession for that first drink. I cannot take a drink ever again as long as I live, no matter how spiritual I get, and that's a question that no one has ever been able to answer. Why? Why is spirituality and a spiritual way of life give me a lifetime of sobriety, yet I can never take one drink no matter how spiritual I get? That's the unanswered question that we have in AA. But anyway, back to this simple and understandable terms as soon as we are willing and honest enough to try. Those having religious affiliations will find here nothing disturbing to their beliefs or ceremonies. There is no friction among us over such matters. We think it no concern of ours what religious bodies our members identify themselves with as individuals. This should be an entirely personal affair which each one decides for himself in the light of past associations or his present choice. In other words, God as you understand Him. That's how they... And, whenever people come into AA meetings, this is one of the... Out in the chapter, Working with Others, it explains that you will greatly handicap yourself if you come in here touting religious ideas and religious attitudes. What you're going to do is you're going to narrow down the field of people that you can help to those people of that religion. Somebody of any other affiliation, like say you're Christian, someone who's Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or something, is going to look at you like, hey, he's trying to teach his version of God. I'm really not into that right now. So one of the things that we do is we go out there, and no matter how religious you feel, do not try to teach other people your religion. Just tell them we have these 12 steps in which whatever God it is that you believe in, we think we can help you get closer to that God. Because it will greatly handicap you, because no one's going to ask you to sponsor them. If you're out there going, religious stuff this, religious stuff that, remember that. It will greatly handicap you, not them. They'll just find somebody who doesn't do that. Not all of us join religious bodies, but most of us favor such memberships. In the following chapter, there appears an explanation of alcoholism as we understand it, then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. Many who once were in this class are now among our members. Surprisingly, remember it says like 50%, half of our original fellowship, 50% of 100 was 50 of the first 100. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. Further on, clear-cut directions are given. Now, I was sober for years before I realized that there were clear-cut directions. I tell you that in 1990, there was something floating around in all the AA rooms which sounded something like this. Your steps are between you and your sponsor, and however many sponsors are out there, it is how many ever different ways there are of working the steps. You can have a dozen different ways of how to work any one of those steps, depending on who it is. And then I ran across a guy and said, "You've been talking to the wrong people, because we have clear-cut directions in here on precisely what you're going to be doing, showing how we recovered. These are followed by 43 personal experiences. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. These give a fair cross-section of our membership and a clear-cut idea of what has actually happened in their lives." There's that word, clear-cut. Clear-cut directions are given. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages, and we believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, "Yes, I am one of them too. I must have this thing." So we'll open up the floor, and we'll start on more about alcoholism next week. And we got 20... Old Civil War silver dollar from the Civil War is a Confederate silver dollar. It says the Confederated States of America, CSA. Got all this, and I got some brand new ones, and I scraped them all up and worn them down. I threw them in the back of my truck, and they've been rolling around in the grease and the dirt, and trying to make them look old, you know.
Now what?
I'm trying to make it look real. It's not a real coin.
Oh, not real, huh?
They sell brand new Confederate money up there, right out. They sell it to you. Coins and paper money and everything, real Confederate money, but it's not old stuff from back when. It's brand new. And I've had it for like 2 or 3 years sitting in my back of my truck, rolling around in all the grime and dirt and grease. And there it is. I see it every once in a while. One of these days I'm going to put it in a road or something, run over it for a couple of months. Hey, how's it going? I wanted to take it to one of those battlefields up there and just toss it out the window. Let it lay on the ground in one of them battlefields, because I don't know where you guys are from, but there's battlefields everywhere in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
I mean, you drive, and it's just like the entire valley. As big as Pompano Beach is the Chickamauga battlefield. Cannons over here, monuments over there. 200,000 dead Yankees over here, 50,000 dead Confederates. The dead Yankees outnumber the Confederates 2-1. It's like somebody went out and bought some real coffee, huh? Put that coffee machine asshole out of fucking business.
You know, they have that same machine at where I work, and it's $1 for a cup of coffee.
How much is that one? That's $1, isn't it? 75? Oh.
It's $1 where we work. Same machine, too.
You mean where you work, they won't even give you coffee? Do they have a pot you can bring your own stuff and make it? What a cheesy bunch, boy. I tell you, everybody's
I think that company owns
You know,
the machines. I don't
there is nowhere in Miami that you can park that you don't have to pay. Nowhere. You cannot park anywhere without paying for it. On the side of the road, at a park, on a fucking anywhere. There's meters and they'll have one big electronic meter with 500 spaces. And you got to put the receipt in your windshield or you'll get a fucking ticket. The whole goddamn place. They start doing that shit everywhere, probably. I guess the more people you get, you know, living in a rural or a city like that, anything they can do to get money. Nickel and dime here, nickel and dime there. Shit, there was this one lot we were paying to work at Bow Harbor 1. We were paying $8 a day for an 8 hour. It's $1 an hour. You pay $8 every day you work to park there. Huh? Yeah. But when you're making, you know, $200 a day, $8 a day, it's, you know, you're like, okay. It's the percentage of your pay. You're like, oh, fuck it, it ain't that.
It is everybody. That's we're all here, huh?
Yeah, it's getting pretty bad. If I got a deck of cards, we'll just play.
You got the chips right there.
Yeah, right. That's what I always say. Here in South Florida, we got a chip system, and the white chips are $1. The red chips are $5.
Now we have a meeting.
No, we could have a bigger poker game.
No, it's past 8:30. That thing's slower. It's 8:33.
Kick back. Kick back behind you.
What's behind you?
Kit Kats.
Oh, well,
You like one? No.
no. I just brushed my teeth before I got here. Well, hello, all four of you, and welcome to the Bottom Line Group. We ask that you silence your cell phones. Fuck it, if it rings, it rings. This is an open meeting of blah, blah, blah. You guys know the routine. Why even go through the rigmarole, huh? All right, so the chapter. No, more about alcoholism. This is more about alcoholism. Focuses primarily on step 1. You know that the next chapter, chapter 4, We Agnostics, is essentially dedicated to step 2. You know, do you believe in God, yes or no? And more about alcoholism is, there's a lot in here about mostly step 1, but then there's the area where you transition that we have, where he's talking about the insanity of the jaywalker who keeps skipping out in front of moving trolleys, trolley cars for the high and all that, and the idea that he's trying to get across is the insanity that precedes the first drink, not the insanity that's a result of years of drinking, which I know is a really big misconception in AA today. And you know, how many times have I been in a meeting where I hear somebody say, my life's getting insane again? And I say, well, then you just completely missed the idea behind insanity in the second step, that God will restore us to sanity. All he's going to restore you to is your reaction to the first drink. It's the insanity that precedes the first drink that we're looking to be restored with. But anyway, that's the second half of this, more about alcoholism. And we got this, there's really a real good description of, here in the middle of the page here on chapter 3, page 30. So I'm an alcoholic. My name's Doug. And this is chapter 3, more about alcoholism. And yeah, that thing's got a noisy gearbox, doesn't it? The gearbox is in there whining away and moving things. And okay, most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. Now, that's pretty clear right there. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. The great obsession of every abnormal drinker, that someday he will control and enjoy his drinking. The only thing I can think of is that there was a period for myself, there was a period in my life when it was fun, and I did control it to a point that it was, most people said, hey, he's, going out and partying, but he's doing the normal things that normal people do, until it got to the point that the normal things that normal people do just didn't exist anymore, and all I was trying to do was recapture the good old days, as I call it. I wanted to go back to the good old days when I could drink again. And I don't know, man. That's one of my unanswered questions in AA. It was why, how come there was a point in my life when I reached it and I said, that's it, I just don't want to do it anymore. And on page 30, more about alcoholism. It's the thing everybody reads in the beginning. You know, most of us have been unwilling to admit we were blah, blah. We're like men who've lost their legs and all that. I always get uncomfortable with that. I was at a meeting at the Boca Pines, and there was a guy with one leg, and every time they'd hand it to me, I'd be like, I'm not reading that. He's like a kind of a buddy of mine. I talk to him all the time. He's got one leg. What am I going to... We're like this guy who lost one leg. He'll never grow a new... That's kind of... All right, so now this is what I've learned is a very... It's really the first place in here where it says that this is the first step. You're working on the first step right here. And when he says we learned, we had to fully concede, he's talking about we... the first 100 that supposedly wrote the book. Of course, it was Bill that wrote the book, and there were several, probably 8 or 10 people of the most sober people who had the most time, like Dr. Bob, and who gave him a little input on what to do. Should they change this? And the whole God as we understand him thing came out. So, of course, this is like in the chapter when Bill writes the chapter to wives. He's actually writing it as if there was a wife giving comments and a wife telling you what was going on, but it's Bill Wilson writing it. And it's his wife who's giving him a little, here, write this, write that. So you might say he's like the ghost writer, but here he's the ghost writer for all the first 100 people who were sober at the time. And whenever you see we learned we had to fully concede, it goes back to the idea that there's a lot of the rehab and halfway house stuff creeping into our AA today, and what's wrong with that is that people give the illusion that you can have a support group of people that you can call on, and that somehow that will suffice to be your sobriety. And what that does is it takes away from the idea that you got to be. This is between you and God, and that's what this is. And anything that other people have to do with this is what you can do for those other people. So not so much what you can call and lean on them. You need to be calling on God, and that's. Whenever you're not calling on God and you're calling on other people, you can easily see how that's taken away from the original idea of the program, that we're looking to build a relationship between us and God. And any time you put some kind of interference in there of calling on human solutions, then we sit around and wonder why nobody's making it, But that's what I was getting at, was we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves. And so many people I hear come in here with a misconception of that, going, this is a we program, together we. No, this is a you and God program. You better find God or you ain't going to make it. We learned we had to fully concede. Now, this is what we, the first 100, did when we got sober and stayed sober and never took another drink. We learned that we had to fully concede. That's a very deep statement there. Fully concede to our innermost self. Fully concede. There's no way to wiggle out of that. Partially concede to, a part of ourselves, to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed, and there's only one way to smash that, and that's trial and error. But the question that I have is, how come so many people spend decades longer than I did with the trial and error part? I mean, I got to tell you, when I was done, and that's all there was to it. I didn't want to do anything anymore, much less drink but I see people out there they just keep going at it and going at it. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. We know that no real alcoholic ever recovers that control. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. That's a term that I hear a lot in here, people trying to remember what it says, the whole pitiful and incomprehensible. We are convinced to a man that alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. Now, that's a pretty flat-out statement there, too. I mean, how many people think that their alcoholism is going to stay steady and they're going to be able to maintain where they're at right now? If you're a real alcoholic, alcoholics of our type are in the grip of a progressive illness that gets worse and worse and worse as time goes on. Over any considerable period, we get worse, never better. It doesn't maintain the same. It gets worse. For me, my fear was that my health was going to get worse. That's one of the things that it still scares me today. That's what keeps me eating like bananas and oranges and vegetables and stuff like that, you're living in a lump of meat, you know. I always thought my health was going to get worse and worse, and I was going to end up looking like those guys that I was hanging with. Looked like they had one foot on a banana peel and the other foot in a grave, you know. I got sober when I was 26, and I looked a lot younger and healthier than I do now, but that scared the hell out of me. We are like men and women who've lost their legs. Oh, wait a minute, it doesn't say women. We are like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men. We have tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances there has been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree that there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. Where he says we have tried every imaginable remedy, in some instances there has been brief recovery, followed always by a still worse relapse. Back in Bill's story, there's a spot where he's in step one. See, what we're talking about here now is step one. You know, the first step. This is the first step in recovery. And when you go back to Bill's story, Bill's got a pretty good description of step one in there, where he says, no words. Now, this is page 8 in Bill's story. And he goes on to explain here that there was something that kept him sober for a brief period of time, and that was my experience with it too. I had this experience for a couple of years in my life. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair. This is page 8 in Bill's story. No words, this is like step 1 for Bill. Despair that I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man, and fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink, and on Armistice Day I was off again. Armistice Day 1934, I was off again. So you see what he's saying here is that fear sobered me for a bit. That was my experience too. I would get brief periods of sobriety, sometimes 3 months. I'd get 3 months of sobriety. And then I was actually going to bars and hanging out in the bars going, hey, I can drink orange juice and hang out and shoot pool with the buddies. And eventually I would always end up with a beer in my hand. Fear sobered me for a bit. And the idea that he's talking about, we're going to be getting into that into this chapter, the insidious insanity of that first drink. Because that's what we're talking about when we transition into the second step. And he's talking about that God can restore us to sanity. Talking about that... the sanity that we're talking about is how you react to the first drink. Do you want one, yes or no? If you say yes, that's insanity. It's been beating you to death for however long it's been doing this. You've been trying to quit. You sworn it off a dozen times. Okay, back to, despite, this is page 31, back to more about alcoholism. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics, you see that designation that he keeps giving us here, real alcoholics. The idea that some people can still stop on their own on a non-spiritual basis, but some of us are real alcoholics, and we must turn our lives over to the care of God, and we must get close to God, and this must be the most important thing in my life. I was in AA, I was in a meeting the other day, and a guy, I don't remember, he was sitting right next to me, I think he said, and he said, I came into AA to get my life back. I didn't come in here to dedicate my life to this place. I want to have my life outside of here. And all I was thinking was, well, we'll see you when you get to White Chip, Chief, because if you're a real alcoholic like me, this has to be the number one thing in your life. All that other stuff, the wife and the kids and the job and all that stuff that's a part of your life will mean nothing if this isn't number one. And he was putting it out there like he came in here, he's going to hang out for a little while and go back out to his real life and the real world and the AA stuff. I don't know. There are people who come in here who aren't like me, who aren't like, if you're a real alcoholic, they don't have to dedicate their lives to this. And that's one of the biggest problems I see in AA is that a lot of people coming in here and they're seeing people come in here and claim that they have 10 years of sobriety and that they were a real alcoholic, and they don't do anything. They don't find God. They don't do the steps. They don't work on this on a daily basis. They don't come into bottom line like their lives depends upon it. And you're looking at them going, well, if he can do it, I can do it too, because I don't want to do that hard work. That is hard work. Dedicating your life to helping others is like another job you have, like raising a kid almost or something. It's a job. Who wants to do that if there's an easy way out of just hanging out in here and getting sober? But that's the mistake I'm making when I think that is that I'm a real alcoholic and this guy can stop on a non-spiritual basis. It's not a requirement that you're a real alcoholic to be in here. It's only a requirement to desire to stop drinking. Despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics are not going to believe they are in that class. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. If anyone who is showing inability to control his drinking can do the right about face and drink like a gentleman, our hats are off to him. Heaven knows we have tried hard enough and long enough to drink like other people. Here are some of the, I hate this part too. Here are some of the methods we have tried. Drinking beer only, limiting the number of drinks, never drinking alone, never drinking in the morning, drinking only at home, never having it in the house, never drinking during business hours, drinking only at parties, switching from scotch to brandy, drinking only natural wines, agreeing to resign if ever drunk on the job, taking a trip, not taking a trip, swearing off forever, with and without a solemn oath, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books, going to health farms and sanitariums. I think that's the idea behind that CNN guy. You know, he comes on and he goes, call and get the cure for alcoholism, 1-800 blah blah. CNN, you guys have seen that guy. Well, that's what his is. His is, if you'll look at the book, it says a holistic approach to recovery. And you know what holistic is? It's bananas and broccoli and what's he say here? Going to health farms and sanitariums, taking more physical exercise, reading inspirational books. That's what that holistic approach thing is, as far as I could tell. Accepting voluntary commitment to asylums. We could increase the list ad infinitum. You know, when you're reading this book, it's important for you to remember something. That this book was meant to be your sponsor. Look at it in this light. Like there was nobody, you weren't going to any AA meetings because there are none. This is 1939. There are no AA meetings in your town. There's no people who are sober. There's no sponsors to ask to help you. This book was given to you by a friend or the employer, the wife, the family, whoever it was that said, man, that guy's drinking. What can we do? Go down to Books A Million and get him a book. What's the other one? You guys, which one? Yeah, there you go. Barnes & Noble. Go down to Barnes & Noble. Get him a book. So they go down, they buy him a book, and they hand it to him. And this book, you're meant to read this book, understand the steps, and get sober through this. That's how you need to look at this book when you're reading it. And what he's doing now is he's trying to explain to a person who's not in contact with AA, who hasn't been in here for years or bouncing in and out or not familiar with it, exactly what the hell we're doing here. We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself, step over to the nearest bar room, and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. It will not take long for you to determine if you are honest with yourself about it. It may be worth a bad case of jitters if you get the full knowledge of your condition. Though there is no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. But the difficulty is that few alcoholics have enough desire to stop while there is yet time. We have heard of a few instances where people who showed definite signs of alcoholism were able to stop for a long period because of an overpowering desire to do so. Here is one. So this is a story of a person who was able to stop on his own with a non-spiritual basis because of an overpowering desire to do so. A man of 30 was doing there's several stories in here. I think there's our first example is a friend we should call Jim. We got the what's the guy? Fred is a partner of a well-known accounting firm. The jaywalker. So these are like several stories he's going to give us of people who are the difference between real alcoholics and non-alcoholics. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business and saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55. After a successful and happy business career, then he fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has. that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline has qualified him to drink like other men. Out came his carpet slippers in a bottle. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all of his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. This case contains a powerful lesson. Most of us had believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here's a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. The truth is that once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion that someday you will be immune to alcohol. You can never, this is the definition of fully concede to our innermost selves, like it said on page 30 over here. To fully concede to my innermost self, if I am planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind, nor any lurking notion anywhere in the back of my head that I'll ever be able to take another drink without it leading back to that nightmare of my life. Now, remember, one thing is that step one will not keep you sober. It's absolutely essential to go on with the rest of the steps to get this. That whole idea about the 100% thing, I got to tell you, I heard a guy say, if you tell people that step one is the only step you need to work 100%, then you're giving them a free pass by the time they get out to step 8 to say, well, by the time you get to step 8, you could be down to like 30% or so. You'd be doing just fine, By the time you get to 9, 25%, it's the only step you need to work 100%. You don't have to work the other steps 100%. So you see, even though Bill Wilson wrote it, and it's in the 12 and 12, it's really unless you say it in that context, you say, look, step one's the only step you need to work 100%, but we suggest you work all of the others 99.9% or as good as you can, as go at it like your life depends upon it. But the way most people say that, it's the only step you need to work 100%, it almost sounds like you're giving them a pass to go, and by the time you get out to step 10, 15, 20%, you'll be fine. That's a lot of people do things like that. Like some people come in here and they go, my best thinking got me here, or something like that. Yeah, your best thinking got you here while you were out there with a bottle in your hand, but you ain't got a bottle in your hand anymore, so now your best thinking's going to keep you in here. I always say, well, you could invert the best thinking got me here thing and say all you have to do is remain stupid and not learn anything, and you're going to get along just fine in here. You're going to stay sober. You got nothing to worry about. All the smart people, they're on their way out. Our first example we shall call Jim, the jaywalker, and Fred. We may not get that far tonight, but those are the three of the examples that we're going to be using in here to show you sane behavior, and then that horizon between the two of insane. And this is not the insanity that we're talking about, what's a sociopath or psychopath, or no one gets 12 steps in the loony bin. This is the insanity that we're going to be talking about is how we react to the first drink. Do you want one? Yes or no? And that we call that alcoholic insanity. And although that phrase is not actually used, there's a lot of people in AA today who just completely miss it. They go, oh, my life's getting insane today. I better get back into the steps. Well, if you didn't pick up a drink, that's not the insanity that we're talking about. We are talking about, and this says this in several places, even in Bill's story, the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink. That's what he's talking about. And that subtle insanity is rooted in self-centered fear is one of the most basic principles of our recovery program. But anyway, we're going to read these 2 or 3 little quick stories here. Actually, I don't think we're going to get that far. But anyway, if you'll slow down, like I used to read through pages of this thing, and I go, man, I didn't see nothing. I read that whole chapter. I read it 3 times. I still don't see. But somebody had to slow me down and say, pay attention to what you're reading. So this is the bottom of page 34. And I'm going to read till we get about 20 minutes, and then we'll open up the second half of the meeting for open discussion. That leaves about 5 minutes apiece, so like I said, prepare your speech. Anyway, just pick something out you want to talk about or something you'd like to comment on or pass it or whatever you want to do. So, How then shall we help our readers determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? The experiment of quitting for a period of time will be helpful, but we think we can render an even greater service to alcoholic sufferers and perhaps to the medical fraternity. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. You see how he's getting right into that, and he's talking about some of the... I would have read right through that and not seen anything. And another thing is, you see how he's constantly saying we. And I'm always hearing people go, this is a we program, this is a we, together we can do it. No, it's not. This is a you and God program, and you better find God or you ain't going to make it. This whole we thing, you see, this is the reason I'm saying that is because people become dependent upon other people. And that is one of the core problems in Alcoholics Anonymous, is dependency upon either overly dependent upon somebody else or overly dominant over somebody else. That's a core human fault, I guess you could call it. But when he says we in here, we go back to that chapter in the beginning where he says we, the first 100 alcoholics who wrote this book, I'll go back there and read it for you so you don't think it's like my opinion. I go back to forward to the second edition, I think it is. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state in mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So the words we in here is not the rehab, the detox, and the whole we the family thing. It's cute, and I like it too if you feel a part of. But don't make the mistake of teaching sponsees or learning yourself that you're going to be dependent upon other human beings, because I see a lot of that in AA, and I also don't see them around very long. The idea that you're going to get a group of people's numbers to become dependent upon them. No, you're going to get people's numbers to be there for them. So back to what we were seeing here. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. So, what sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of that first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to a point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? Or what is he thinking? Of what is he thinking? Sorry. So our first example in these three examples here, our first example we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the asylum, he came into contact with us. So this is a story that Bill's given us here of somebody who they had, because they had about, I think Bill had 4 or 5 years when he started writing this book. He had about 4 years of sobriety, him and Bob, and most of the people in AA at that time only had about a year. If you'll read some of the literature, it took those first 2 or 3 years was real slow going, and it wasn't until the Cleveland group came into play. Outside of Akron spawned the Cleveland group, and the Cleveland group is largely responsible for the spread of Alcoholics Anonymous. And many people think that Akron and Ohio or Akron and New York was, but if you'll read the literature, there was a reason why Cleveland was responsible for the large expanse of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was that they were assigning sponsees. They were overwhelmed with new people coming in, and they didn't know what to do, so they started assigning. They'd say, okay, you've been sober 2 weeks, you get this guy who's coming in the door next. You've been sober 13 days, you get the guy after him. And they would actually assign, and that's what happened to me. That was a turning point in my life, was my sponsor said to me, I can't handle all the people. He had like 49 years of sobriety, and he turned to me, and actually 39 at the time, but now he's got like, I think he's got like 52 or something. But anyway, he says to me, you're going to help this guy over here, and there was 2 or 3 of us around him, and he started assigning us sponsees. And that was a turning point in my life, because up to that point, I had just sat around like everybody else, and I go, well, nobody's asked me to sponsor him. I'm in the clear. It's not my fault. No one asked me. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found, which was like step 1 and 2. He made a beginning in step 3. His family was reassembled, and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. All went well for a time. And this is the key point here, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Now remember, in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's several things that we do to get us to this point. That the sole reason for the existence of the first 11 steps is step 12. And that is the definition of what we're doing in step 12, is to enlarge our spiritual life. Remember back in Bill's story where he said, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. So this is the separation point between people who are in chronic relapse, and that, like this guy right here, this is one of these early people that he had come along. He failed to enlarge his spiritual life. He made a beginning, but he didn't follow through with it. And so many people in AA, I see them doing that all the time. And just like I did, they sit here and go, but nobody's asked me to sponsor them. My conscience is clear. I'm clear to this. I'm not to blame. No one's asked me. To his consternation, he found himself drunk half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him, reviewing carefully what had happened. He agreed he was a real alcoholic. Remember that they do make there's out in the chapter to wives, there are 4 descriptions, and the last one is described as, I don't know about you guys, but me, the worst case scenario. And in the doctor's opinion, there are 5 types of alcoholics outlined out there. But I think the 5th type that he describes is manic depressive. It's like the 5th one that the doctor describes. But he agreed he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the asylum if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for who he had a deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. We asked him to tell us exactly how it happened, and this is his story. I came to work on Tuesday morning, and you know those guys make a big joke about that. He goes, he came to work on Tuesday morning. Where was he on Monday? Why didn't he come to work on Monday morning? But anyway, that was just those seminar guys always brought that up. Now, this is a part that I keep highlighting here. He says, I remember I felt irritated. You see that? I remember I felt irritated. This is like a precursor to his relapse here. And remember what it tells us in the 4th step. It says that resentment, anger is the number 1 offender. And what irritated, what else could you call irritated? A form of anger, I guess. A mild form of anger, maybe. I don't know. Repeated. Anyway. I remember I felt irritated that I had to be the salesman for a concern I once owned. I had a few words with the boss, but nothing serious. Then I decided to drive into the country and see one of my prospects for a car. On the way, I felt hungry, so I stopped at a roadside place where they have a bar. I had no intention of drinking. I just thought I would get a sandwich. I also had the notion that I might find a customer for a car at this place, which was familiar, for I had been going to it for years. I had eaten there many times during the months I was sober. I sat down at a table and ordered a sandwich and a glass of milk, still no thought of drinking. I ordered another sandwich and decided to have another glass of milk. Now, you see where it's turning into these italics now. This is where the sane behavior, all of a sudden he was a normal guy, and then bang, out of nowhere comes this thought. Suddenly the thought crossed my mind. And this is the crux of the problem for the alcoholic. What does he say? He said, so we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem for me is that there's something that drives this insanity. Somewhere out of nowhere in the back of my head comes the thought that I can have one drink. And that's the insanity that we speak of, and we call that alcoholic insanity. This has nothing to do with getting into an argument over a parking spot, or, you know, so many people like here come in here and go, oh, my life's getting insane again. Well, if you didn't pick up a drink, then that's the only insanity that the 12 steps will relieve you of. They will not relieve you of psychotic behavior. They just won't. There's nothing they can do for you in a real mental manic depressive. I mean, I think Bill did say that his depression was rooted in self-pity when he finally found his way out, that he had suffered for some 15 years in a deep chronic depression, and when he finally found his way out after all the pills and doctors, that he looked back on it and said that he still found that underlying he had some kind of dependency on things human, that he wouldn't completely let everything go to God. But anyway, I'm not saying that alcohol, this 12 steps are the cure-all, but he did write that depression he felt was based in self-pity. His depression was. But here's this insanity that we're talking about here. That's a subtle insanity. As Bill puts it in his story, Then came the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink, and on Armistice Day of 1934, I was off again. And that's how he writes his last relapse that he remembered as he left the detox there with Silkworth. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Now, this is a guy who had been in contact with AA and had been through the first 3 steps with a sponsor where he says he made a beginning. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answers we had found. They told him what the answer was. He knew it. And he made a beginning, but he never followed through with it. He wasn't sponsoring anybody. He wasn't doing a daily inventory. He wasn't finding his anger and applying forgiveness. He wasn't finding his guilt and applying amends to it. And he wasn't finding his fears and helping others to get out of self-centered fear. It's the basis of our recovery program. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. The experiment went so well that I ordered another whiskey and poured it into more milk. That didn't seem to bother me, so I tried another. Thus started one more journey to the asylum for Jim. Here was the threat of commitment, the loss of family and position, to say nothing of that intense mental and physical suffering which drinking always caused him. He had much knowledge about himself, yet as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with the milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. And, I can't stand it when people come in here and go, the definition of insanity is doing this. Well, somebody smack that guy. Well, it's Polly want a cracker. And I call it the Polly want a cracker syndrome, and I was one of the worst ones. When I had a year sober, I did the same thing. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I'm just saying I wish we could get the record straight, because so many people come in here and go, what's the definition of insanity? Is doing the same thing? No, the definition of insanity is that you picked up a drink knowing that it's going to devastate your life again. That's the definition of insanity for us, the one that we're concerned with. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think this an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been the characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomena that parallel with our sound reasoning. There inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking that first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. The next day we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. So you see, remember what he's doing here. He's writing in this book to somebody in Butte, Montana in 1939. There's no way. Somebody can't say, why don't you go to an AA meeting and straighten out? There was no AA meetings. There was the hint of an AA on a radio show. Remember, they didn't even have TV back then. Maybe they had something at the when you go to see the movies that have a little play in the front of it or something, you might have heard something about it. I don't know. But I know that the AA was largely a word-of-mouth thing. There wasn't the system of CNN and headline news or whatever we have today. In some circumstances, we have gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. We now see that we had began to drink deliberately instead of casually. There was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. So, essentially what I'm seeing here is that the fear of what will happen if I drink will not stop me from drinking. And the reason I brought that up is because I happen to know for a fact that there are 2 ways of staying sober in alcohol. There's 2 ways of staying sober, period. One of those is the fear of what will happen if I drink. If you're a real alcoholic, there are people who are not as far gone as he quotes it in here, as a real alcoholic. I am a real alcoholic. I tried for years, and I after several years of thinking that I can control it, thinking of what I can, I'm smart enough to put this thing together, I came back and I said, you know what? I cannot decide. I decide not to have one, and I have one anyway. There's no question about it. So Now what we're talking about here is trying to get this idea to the people in Butte, Montana in 1939. There's a part of this book that I like to bring up constantly, and that is out into the last chapter that we call the actual Big Book, Before Dr. Bob's Nightmare, the personal stories, where he says, though you be but one man with this book in your hand. This is page 162 at the bottom down there, and 63 at the top. Thus we grow, and so can you. Though you be but one man with this book in your hand, we believe and hope it contains all you will need to begin. And he goes on to say that you too can help other alcoholics in your community. You can go after these people. You can, with all the desperation that a drowning man grasps a life preserver, duplicate what these guys did and try to help somebody and get other people sober, and as a byproduct, keep yourself sober. And that is one of the most basic ideas of Alcoholics Anonymous that I try to take to every meeting that I go to, and then back it up with some of this this literature that we have. Our behavior is as absurd. Now, this is that jaywalking story here, which I thought was, I used to think it was cute, comical, but I do see how, you can replace drinking for jaywalking and see how this would mimic our behavior exactly as an alcoholic. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. He enjoys himself for a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap, having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts him, and he is slightly injured several times in succession. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, he is hit again, and this time has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good, but in a few weeks he breaks both legs. And through the years, his conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce, and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. He shuts himself up in an asylum, hoping to mend his ways, but the day comes, out he races in front of a fire engine, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? And you may think our illustration too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol had been involved, we had been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? All right, so I'm going to stop right there, and next week I'll pick up. Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. I'll pick up there next week. So we got those two stories underneath our, behind us here. The story of this first example we should call Jim, and the jaywalker. And remember, what we're trying to do here is establish the pattern of number one, that our behavior has been insane. And although it may not be, like clinical, the craziness that you might expect in someone who's like out killing people for the fun of it or something, it is a certain insanity that, I don't know, for me, I can easily see it. I always say, you know what, the first step for me, and I think it just to be a gift of alcohol. No one could explain the first step to me. All I could do was see the first step in hindsight. I didn't learn the first step and then experience it. I experienced it and then read it in a book and said, yeah, that's exactly what I felt. And I think that's the same thing for most people. Most people finish the first step like I did years before I ever quit drinking. And I believe so too. If you'll read Bill's story, he says that too. He says that how dark it is before, and I forget. It won't take me but a second to find it. Bill's story, Bill's first step. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity, quicksand stretched around me. And I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. But he drinks again. And how dark it is before the dawn. He then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. So, I'm in Butte, Montana in 1940, and then nobody's there is no sponsorship. There is it's just this book, and I'm expected to read this, comprehend what it is that I'm reading, get sober, and then start helping other people get sober. You might say that's crazy, but it has happened. That's the way Alcoholics Anonymous, although we did spring up a lot through, the span. When you read Comes of Age, you'll see that many of the other cities, like they say Miami and Dallas and many of the cities that are south of that came from Cleveland. All of the people who were from Cleveland were like traveling salesmen, and it was a very big job up in that area, I guess, at that time. And those traveling salesmen would go to other cities, and that's how AA started up. And although you say New York and Akron are largely responsible for AA, Cleveland is credited with the biggest expanse. Anyway, back to the idea of insanity. I don't know about that whole doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, does that help me at all? I don't think so. What helps me is to know that we're not talking about loony bin, and psychiatrists don't sit back and go, what I think you ought to do is work these 12 steps of recovery, and instead they give them a little pill, whatever those Thorazine or whatever I don't know what they prescribe for people. I've never been to one, but psychiatrists rarely prescribe 12 steps for really insane people who are really crazy. So I think I need to get the separation of those two, because there's a lot of people in AA who don't seem to notice the difference between those two, the real crazy people versus just me thinking, hey, I can have a drink now. That was crazy as shit. You destroyed your life for 15 years, and you think you can have a drink? Anyway, I'll open up the floor. We got 30 minutes, so that's about 5 minutes each. Who's first? Anything that we've read? Hey. Hey, Al.
Doug, you started on one of the follow-up that you said, actually, you said that there are two ways that you can stay sober in alcohol. One was fear to change it, and you do a second one, right?
Faith in God. That's what the result of the step 12 is, faith in God. Faith that He will take care of everything. It's how we combat the fear. As we read on, we're going to see that insanity that precedes that first drink, that drives us to that first drink, is based in fear.
The fear, for me, that never keeps me sober now.
That's just it, yeah. Fear-based sobriety will not last. It must be converted into a faith-based sobriety.
And then the other thing I expect coming out is the concept of that sponsor thing. And I've been in other fellowships where, they go and get a sponsor, and this time, it happened very clearly. Some guy came up to me, a second meeting, and said, introduced himself and asked me about what your sponsor that you wanted. And I said, yeah, he actually kind of came up, and I found that originally was like, wow, this is really aggressive with me. I'm not comfortable with it. But it's really what I needed at that time. I didn't have any ability to go to somebody, drunk and go high and say I can make a rational decision on who would be my sponsor. I need someone to basically take me and help me and guide me. And I was very grateful for that gentleman. I still am today. That he didn't wait for me to ask him. He asked me.
I don't know why you guys are looking around the room. We got 5 minutes apiece, so you may as well just start talking. Either that or sit there while I ramble on some more. Which I think I'm done.
I'm Jeannie, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Gene.
You're right on target with everything you're saying. The insanity that I've lived with, and I'll bet I spent 14 years on Prozac because of the deep depression that I had that tormented me constantly. And fortunately, been off them for quite a while now.
Whose time are we burning anyway? Who's next? All right. I don't know your name. Tag, you're it.
My personal features are something I'm a little sad. That's okay. I'll be happy to share. Certainly, I am powerless, not only without help, but, you know, I definitely am very good at kind of talking myself into thinking this kind of works, this kind of moderation, okay, all that stuff. And of course, it always ends disastrously. So, you know, to accept that I see a little change is kind of where I'm at right now. So, basically back to step one, which is, you know, acceptance that this disease is never gonna change for me. That, even though it's one day at a time, I really can't entertain the idea ever, you know, taking beer instead of milk, or, you know, whatever crazy thought is in my head at that moment. You know, and I just really have to accept that today, more than my problems can be solved by indulging in a vice, which is alcohol, and to stay focused on, you know, starting working steps again and having a good foundation. One of the things that you said in the, we were talking about, the book was talking about also was, the dependency on people. And I'm a very social person, even though I was sitting back very quietly. But, I'm a very social person, and I really can kind of lean in that direction. And that kind of got me thinking, and I was thinking about that, and that, you know, I kind of need to take a little more active role in my own recovery. So that's something that I'm, you know, thinking about right now to start. So I have nothing to say about that, except, you know, thank you for bringing that up. That's all.
You're it.
I'm Andrew. I'm an alcoholic addict.
Hi, Andrew.
For me, when I was in my really bad state of addiction, I mean, that insanity was there all every day. Just, I just remember when I was using,
Hey, Bill.
I like their choice of words. Suddenly the thought process. Suddenly. That's usually the way it happens, suddenly. I think it was going just like a month ago. I was sitting on the couch watching some TV show where a white American Jew was up in the headwaters of the Mekong River in China talking to the local fishermen with an interpreter. Suddenly, it seemed like a good idea. Knock back a bottle of scotch or something. Not that I went and did so. Engaged in this thing for a couple of minutes now. The longer I've stuck with it, practiced this program, stayed in fellowship, it's like the fewer of those suddenly moments I have. I think I'm missing it to everyone lately too. I've probably tried thinking out of cure it. Be here anymore. So in a way, I'm sort of grateful that it still happens once in a while. Remember early recovery, earlier recovery. Remember hearing people talk a lot about lifting of the obsession. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. I didn't know I had an obsession. I thought I wanted to drink all the time, which is normal life. I couldn't translate that into what they were talking about. So, yeah, there came a time when it seemed like that happened coincided with this story, but yeah, it seemed like my obsession was lifting. But I still get to have my suddenly moments. But I don't know. I remember. I mean, I'm not a first-time winner. This is the first time I ever had any time with fallen time. But it seems like when I was exposed to AA before, I don't know, maybe it was like grade 5 or something. Would read this stuff and it wouldn't make a lot of sense. And it was Bill's story, and I was thinking, why poor trembling and shaking, he had to go up. Glad I ain't as bad as him. I don't know. When I came in as a newcomer and got sober, to identify it, like I only had to read it once. I already knew. I knew I was sit in a meeting, I hear people talk about the way they drank. I was in, among fellow travelers. Not that I thought any of this crap was going to work for me. I wasn't making that big deal. But, I don't know. I can't actually tell anybody how to stay sober. I'm not even sure how I did it. It seems like all I did half the time was just show up and try to follow directions and aid and God did. I just happened to be there when it happened. But, I mean, for that matter, I can't even tell you if you're an alcoholic. I mean, you can figure that out. Sometimes I'm sitting in the meetings and I start wondering if I'm an alcoholic, kind of like we were talking about when people talk about, alcoholic thinking, and they say something they thought, boy, I never thought like that. I wonder if I really am an alcoholic. Only part I know with 100% certainty is I drink again. But, I don't know, it didn't used to matter so much. I don't remember so much thinking that I was going to be able to handle it. I just remember completely not caring about the fact that I went out. Nihilism, that's the 25-step version. I had my first drink in the mornings over the toilet, and I knew I was going to puke it out. But I had to knock it back and puke it up so I could get to the second one, which I still had over the toilet, because even though it stayed down most of the time, sometimes it would come out. So I could have the third one out of the bathroom, because that one was going to stay down. And I was okay with drinking